Education of females. Ladies, I hate to say this. Females were seen at this time as intellectually inferior. Now we know today you're not. As a matter of fact, you've taken over colleges and graduate schools. But back in these days, schooling for females was just a no-no. They were accepted at dame schools, but receive a very different type of education. Some American women received the same education as the boys, but they kind of snuck in through the back door. Abigail Adams, who was the wife of John Adams, the second president, Abigail and her girlfriends got together and convinced the Latin grammar school teacher to teach them in the summertime, I'm sure for a fee. So if you were an adventuresome female and you were devious enough, you could probably get an education, but you had to work at it. Estimates say that by 1700, 75% of American women were unable to read. Well, I don't think the number for men was much better than that. 25% being able to read was probably good for the time. More on the education of females. Some wealthy girls seek private schooling. But what could you study in private schools? Dance, French, piano. Those activities were considered to be ornamental areas, not practical things. You could earn a living by it, but they were not considered real subjects at the time. Among the earliest private schools open to girls were those private venture schools we first mentioned, and the grandmother of them all, the Ursuline Convent in Nolens, Louisiana, 1729. That was a Catholic school, but for wealthy young women, even those living in Boston, if you wanted to go to school and were willing to pay, you could go to Louisiana and get a pretty good education. The Moravian School for Girls opened a bit later, 1742. That was in Germantown, Pennsylvania, run by the Moravian Church. Some authorities, and insert the name Benjamin Rush, some authorities maintain that although at this time opportunities for women were limited, the ability of colonial women to handle adversity and hardship, much as the men of the time, served to prove their worth and gain for themselves a greater degree of freedom and respect than that accorded European women. We thought very highly of our American women, even though we wouldn't let them in school. We thought they were much preferred to those hotbed flowers that grew in Europe. Moving on, let me remind you we are coming close to the end, and so there will be an ending in the not too distant future. Blacks in the New World. In 1619, 20-some were sold to the colonists at Jamestown, Virginia. This was the beginning of the trickle. This trade would increase as plantations grew. Most slaveholders viewed slavery and education to be incompatible. Therefore, many states passed laws forbidding the education of slaves. There were, however, attempts. They were mainly in the North, and they centered on the idea of let's bring God to the heathens. More on the early attempts. John Eliot taught both blacks and Indians as early as 1674. Cotton Mather, who was a New England minister, had an evening school for blacks and Indians. Daniel Pego had a school for reading, catechizing, and writing. Now, these existed, but there are few later records that attest either to the success or to the failure of these early efforts, just ringing silent. Efforts of the Quakers, this is mainly in Pennsylvania now, sought to educate religiously and also sought to abolish slavery. William Penn, in 1700, held monthly meetings for instruction in reading and writing. Anthony Benezet had an evening school in his home in 1750. 20 years later, he built a school that would become known as Benezet House. He also said, "I can with truth and sincerity declare that I have found among blacks," remember he's talking about blacks, "as great a variety of talents as amongst a like number of whites. And I am bold to assert that the notion entertained by some, that blacks are inferior to their capacities, is a vulgar prejudice, founded on the pride or ignorance of their lordly masters, who have kept their slaves at such a distance as to be unable to form a right judgment of them." More on the Quakers. They founded the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts. They also formed the Pennsylvania Abolition Society in 1776. This society counted Thomas Paine, Noah Webster, and Benjamin Franklin among its members. Is he done, Martha? Apparently he is.